Welcome back to Live Now from Fox. I'm Shawna Khalafi, continuing to follow the latest developments out of the Middle East. At least 3 U.S. service members have been killed and 5 others seriously injured in Operation Epic Fury as the U.S. struck Iran on Saturday morning. President Trump today saying that the U.S. will avenge their deaths and that he expects likely more to be killed before this conflict ends. And we're also getting this joint statement into our newsroom from the U.S. and its Middle East allies. This was posted by Dylan Johnson, Assistant Secretary of State for Global Public Affairs. It says, joint statement on Iran's missile and drone attacks in the region, and the United States, Bahrain, Jordan, Kuwait, Qatar, and Kingdom of Saudi Arabia and the United Arab Emirates strongly condemn the Islamic Republic of Iran's indiscriminate and reckless missile and drone attacks against sovereign territories across the region, including Bahrain, Iraq, including the Iraqi Kurdistan region, Jordan, Kuwait, Oman, Qatar, and Kingdom of Saudi Arabia and the United Arab Emirates. That statement going on to say these unjustified strikes targeted the sovereign territory, endangered civilian populations, and damaged civilian infrastructure. The Islamic Republic's actions represent a dangerous escalation that violates the sovereignty of multiple states and threatens regional stability. The targeting of civilians and of countries not engaged in hostilities is reckless and destabilizing behavior. He says, we stand united in defense of our citizens' sovereignty and territory and reaffirm our right to self-defense in the face of these attacks. We remain committed to regional security and commend the effective air and missile defense cooperation that has prevented far greater loss of life and destruction. And it's now day 2 of the American-Israeli airstrikes in Iran, and Sunday saw continued bombings not only inside of the country but also across the Middle East. As both sides continuing aggression here in the U.S., there is heightened sense of security. There's also been a lot of celebration from some of America's Iranian communities who are praising President Trump's decision to attack and take out the supreme leader. Fox News correspondent CB Cotton has more on the impacts here in the U.S.
Thousands of Iranians and Iranian Americans flooded Times Square today, some waving flags, others chanting, but all celebrating what they see as a turning point in Iran's history. Many of them carried the former flag of Iran that has the lion and sun, a symbol of the nation before the Islamic regime. Others held signs praising President Trump and Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, and some went further, holding posters celebrating the death of Ayatollah Khamenei. People here today told me they believe this moment could signal the beginning of regime change in Iran.
I thought that I'm gonna die, never see this day. So very emotional. It's you have to understand, we were in a big jail for 47 years and no hope of freedom.
I never thought this would happen in my lifetime. And getting the opportunity to be here, out here with the Iranian American diaspora and stuff, and people who had relatives who suffered under revolution, who had people who were executed. I just cannot tell you how much of an honor this feels like.
Similar scenes are unfolding across Los Angeles, home to the largest Iranian diaspora outside of Iran. There, crowds have poured into the streets, dancing, singing, and waving Persian flags in celebration. But not all reaction has been supportive. On Saturday in New York City, protesters gathered to condemn the U.S.-led strikes. But those who gathered here today in Times Square celebrated, praising U.S. military action. In Times Square, CB Cotton, Fox News.
So that was CB Cotton talking about how people in the U.S., the Iranian communities here, are reacting to this weekend's strikes on Iran, also the elimination of the supreme leader Khamenei. We want to bring in right now an expert on this, political scientist, Dr. Benjamin Radd. Thank you so much for being here with us.
My pleasure.
So let's start with, since we just heard in that story some of the reaction here in the US, how are the people inside of Iran reacting to this weekend's strikes, also the death of the supreme leader and some other powerful figures in the Islamic regime?
Yeah, I'm sure many people have seen on social media the videos and images of street celebrations, of fireworks going off, of people celebrating the demise of the supreme leader, and what they're hoping is going to be either the fall of the regime or at least a change of guard or relaxation of the police state that they live under, the oppression they live under on a daily basis. So, but they are guarded. They are cautiously optimistic because they know that the battle's not over. They know that the regime still has a lot of elements still intact and is still capable of extreme violence.
And of course, with so many powerful figures within the regime being taken out at this point, what's next for leadership? We did hear a little bit earlier today, President Trump had a phone call with the New York Times where he was asked about what's next for leadership in Iran. He said there are some choices about who could lead next. We also heard from Iran's top national security official saying an interim committee will run the country until a successor is chosen for the supreme leader. So what's next in terms of leadership for the Islamic regime, and what steps would need to be taken to reach democracy that many Iranians are calling for?
So let's start with the first step here. And Iran's constitutional system has a process for selecting the next supreme leader. The issue is that there is nobody as a candidate who has the stature and the following that Ayatollah Khamenei did. He himself was really not qualified. He was sort of elevated into the position by Khomeini, his predecessor, the founder of the Islamic Republic, on his deathbed. So, Khamenei was a unique, singular figure. He was the last of the old guard that was part of the founding generation of the Islamic Republic. And the potential successors don't have, the following, the widespread appeal among the devout masses, those that are loyal to the regime. So the question of who that would be, that would placate all the different power factions, and whether he would have the legitimacy to really take Iran to the next level, or into the next stage, I should say, that's all in question. And will it be a figurehead? Will some sort of a council of other members, military members, intelligence members, judges, for example, jurists, would they be the ones to really lead the country on a day-to-day basis? Any of this is possible. I think for the Islamic Republic, this is uncharted territory. This is not a contingency in this way that they had planned. They do have a succession plan. At least, we suspect they do. We don't know what it is, but I didn't think they planned it to go this way. So I think there's a lot of unknowns to that. And then to your last point about democracy, we're still a ways off. This is a regime that's not going to go down without a fight. They're throwing every last volley that they have, whatever remaining resources they have, to basically stay in power. And we don't know exactly how long that'll last or what the extent of that retaliation will be.
And we are only about 2 days into this conflict, and we keep getting updates. More countries in the region getting involved with strikes hitting also in Lebanon, in Dubai, different areas across the Middle East. What does this mean for the regional implications of this? Is this something that could spread even farther across the region? And what does that mean for the stability of the Middle East long term as well?
If Iran continues to target the Emirates, the Gulf states, the states that were not directly involved in any way, that really didn't want this conflict, then I think it opens up to a multi-front war for them, not just Israel and the United States, but the other Arab armies as well. They've issued very strongly worded statements indicating they reserve their right to respond to attacks on their sovereign territory. Iran has hit not just military targets; they've hit civilian targets. They've hit luxury hotels. They hit Dubai's airport. All of this for them is a breach of their sovereignty and a violation of international law. Whether this escalates to a further conflict, again, remains to be seen. Will these Arab states respond? Will they defer to the United States to carry out its responses? Will Iran continue its barrage against these other countries? Lebanon is the outlier here because Hezbollah joined the offensive with Iran in firing and missiles into Israel, and Israel responding. Lebanon being the home for the Hezbollah militant group, which is a proxy of Iran. And so it was anticipated that Hezbollah would get involved in this battle.
And we want to bring up some viewer questions. We've been asking our viewers to send in questions, what they would like to know about this conflict and about the status of the situation in the Middle East. So we have this one. This is from Aaron in Lakeland saying, how many officials are still devout to the Islamic Republic in Iran? Also talk about the people inside of Iran. We know, of course, we've seen people celebrating the death of Khamenei. We've also seen some people mourning. Can you give us an idea of how much of the people in Iran, even just the citizens and the people in power, how many of them still support the regime being in power? Can you give us an idea of how that breaks up within the country?
Yeah, it's really difficult to ascertain because it's, they haven't been able to take polls really. There aren't free and fair elections that we know of, that we enjoy here in the West. And voter sentiment or the sentiment of citizens is very hard to gauge because many fear coming out in opposition to the regime. But, let's assume if you've got a country of 90 million or so, let's assume you've got maybe close to 20 million might still be loyal to the regime to different degrees. Again, this is just a broad estimate. The overwhelming majority of the country is young. They were born after the 1979 revolution. They have no memory of life under the previous government, under the Shah. All they know is the Islamic Republic. All they've known is the oppression they've experienced under it. And as a result, a huge segment of the population, more than half probably, has shifted away from Islam, has become secular effectively. And so we have to account for that. So we think that the devout followers still, those who are loyal, make up a minority, make up maybe about a quarter to a fifth of the population, less than a third, definitely. But the degree to which, how extreme that remaining quarter or third are, we don't exactly know. And that's, again, very difficult to ascertain that in a state that has no free press and no expression, no right to expression for their citizens.
Yeah, it's definitely hard to get some reliable numbers and statistics coming out from Iran for all those reasons. You mentioned even getting accurate death counts from those protests that we saw leading up to this conflict. I want to ask you another question from one of our viewers. As we are only 2 days in, we know at least 3 U.S. service members were killed during the initial strikes. So we have this question. This is from Norris in Hinesville saying, what are the odds of boots on the ground? So the U.S. has had a historic military buildup in the region, sending several naval ships. But what is the probability that they actually send physical soldiers there to Iran? Could you foresee that happening?
So given that we're in an election year and given the president's pledge and his various representatives in government, we had even Lindsey Graham, I think, stating that as well today, that the commitment for the president is no boots on the ground, that this is meant to be a remote operation using carriers, using fighter jets, using drones, and that the plan is not to put boots on the ground, that the president feels the objective can be satisfied without having to do that. My feeling is that if it gets to the point where the president can't meet the objective he wants and he needs to deploy soldiers to go in, that is when I think he will look for an off-ramp or an exit to this and find some sort of a diplomatic solution to end it. And I think that's what Iran is banking on. Iran's trying to make it very painful in the interim so that it forces the president's hand, knowing that the red line for the president is the actual deployment of forces on Iranian soil.
And so we know that Congress is going to be briefed on this on Tuesday. We still haven't heard actually a formal declaration of war. What would it take for that to happen? Is that something that you think could come after this briefing on Tuesday?
So under the War Powers Act, the president does not need to formally seek a declaration of war. He has 60 days to fight a limited war, basically a war that is undeclared. He can deploy U.S. forces to engage in military combat for a period of 60 days. After that point, then he needs to go back to Congress and seek approval, and then he has 30 days to wind it down. So effectively 90 days to start and end all armed conflict without a formal declaration. There are those in Congress, and the Senate in particular, who feel that the president doesn't have that authority. We've yet to see any legal challenge that shows the president cannot do this. We've seen other presidents do similar things, including launching drone strikes operations. We saw President Obama do that. We saw President Biden do that. So there's a precedent for past presidents using U.S. military force without a declaration of war, and that right or that privilege under the president's Article 2 powers and under the War Powers Act still persist.
We want to get to one more viewer question that we have. We've been hearing a lot from the exiled Crown Prince Reza Pahlavi. He's been very vocal, not just after these strikes, but during the protests. Also, the Iranian government killing many protesters who were speaking out against the regime. And Pahlavi has said that he wants to assist in a transition to democracy. So we have Hunter here from Albany asking, could the Pahlavi dynasty potentially return to power in Iran? So even temporarily to aid in that transition, or even taking that power back permanently. What are the odds of that happening?
Well, given that the Iranian opposition is not unified and they're outside of Reza Pahlavi, there is nobody else really that has the broad appeal, that has enough popularity to really take that mantle. He is the leading candidate. He's not a necessarily strong candidate for various reasons, again, because the opposition is so fractured, but he is a viable candidate to be a opposition leader and to help Iran in the rebuilding process if and when it gets to that stage. But that's a huge if and when. And it's also hard to gauge what his popularity is inside Iran. Now, we know there have been chants of Javid Shah, which means long live the king, by Iranian citizens in the last few weeks, going back to January. But again, how far that goes, how broad that support is in Iran, given the inability to really reach Iranians and to poll them and ask them these questions, it remains a big unknown. But he is a popular figure in the West, definitely.
Okay, thank you so much, Benjamin, for your input here. I want to ask you, what else are you going to be watching? This may just be getting started. We're only in day 2, but President Trump has said that they're prepared for this level of attacks to last 4 to 5 weeks. Today, he did say that they seem to be a little bit ahead of schedule on that timeline. Do you think that this is just the beginning, and what are you going to be watching for in the days and weeks ahead?
Yeah, what I want to see are 2 things. Number one, will the Arab states, will the Gulf states that have been targeted, are they going to respond directly to the rocket fire, the missile fire they've sustained, the drone attacks? And number 2, are we going to start to see defections from within the Iranian security apparatus, specifically the IRGC and maybe some of the besieged militia, the street enforcers who've been most brutal that we saw back in January? Will we start to see members of those units peel off, decide that they, for whatever reason, whether for their own fear of their own lives being killed, or basically deciding this battle is no longer worth it with the supreme leader gone, with that ideological figurehead now gone, will we start to see defections? And that's the other thing I'm really looking for.
Okay, well, before we let you go, we want to ask just one more viewer question. Somebody asking, what does this escalation mean for American citizens in the region? So, of course, we've heard from not just U.S., but other countries telling citizens to get out of Iran and out of the neighboring countries. But for anybody that's still there, what does that mean now? Is there any way for them to get out? And what are the implications of that?
First, these are great questions from the readers. And to Jacob's question here, what does this escalation mean for Americans in the region? They are at risk. I mean, we've seen now 3 service members, U.S. military, who've been killed and others have been injured. We know that Iran sees these moments as an existential moment. It's going to throw everything it has, no restrictions, at trying to get the United States to back off, to back down. And if that means targeting American civilians where they find them, they will do so. We've heard the deputy foreign minister, the Iranian deputy foreign minister, say as much today in an interview, that this is, Iran at this point is fighting for its survival, the regime is. And so they consider any American, any American, be they civilian or not, a fair target.
All right, Dr. Benjamin Radd, we really appreciate your input here. And of course, we will be watching very closely for any developments here. And hopefully we can check back in with you as things progress.